Hi, I'm Donna Stanley with Endless Mountain Labradors, and today I want to talk about the best and worst foods for your pets, your dogs and your cats. And whenever I do a video about food, it brings up a lot of emotions in people. It's one of the most emotional topics that I've ever covered, and people have real opinions about food. So what I want to talk about today are some facts and some opinion. It's going to be mixed in a little bit, but let's talk first about the fact that diet is so much the foundation of health in your pet. So that's why it's so important. It's a foundation. If it's not there and it's not complete, your dog is going to experience all kinds of health issues. So also, while you're watching this video, don't feel guilty if you're not feeding the best food at the top of the list. The goal is to at least move up 1 or 2 notches so that you can do better and better for your dog. And the other thing is, I realize that a lot of people can't feed maybe the best food, perhaps because of economic reasons. But when you get to that point where you can do it economically, I recommend that you do that. So let's just start out with the best food you can feed your pet. And when we talk about the best food, that means it's species appropriate. So I'm going to specifically be obviously talking about canines and felines. And one of the most important things for them is high protein. They grew up, their ancestors ate meat. They ate the stomach of their prey, which meant there were also herbs and some enzymes and things in there. So when I'm talking about this diet, it's not just a piece of meat. Make sure you understand that, because some people actually think that this diet, which I call either a raw or a paleo diet, is just giving your dog raw meat, and it really isn't, because they do require all of the minerals and vitamins that you need to either add to that or include in their diet in some way. So the other thing that they really need is high moisture. And raw or paleo diet, and many of you have eaten a paleo diet for humans, so you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's a species eating what it is supposed to naturally, by nature, eat, and therefore the body will function better. And one of the reasons with dry, especially commercial foods, that we're having a lot of organ failure in pets is because it doesn't have enough moisture. So our pets are actually living in sort of a state of constant dehydration, and drinking more water is not always what they do. They just are dehydrated most of the time. So if they were eating prey, for instance, you know, a rabbit in the wild or a mouse or something like that would be about 70% moisture. So that's why I wanted to make sure you understood how that is very species appropriate. Also, for dogs and cats, low starches or low carbohydrates. We've seen a lot in the past decade of grain-free being in vogue. It doesn't mean taking out all starches and all grains. It's just that with commercial foods, especially your kibbles, you're going to see a predominance of carbohydrates, and that is not species appropriate for our dogs and cats. One of the things that happens when they're eating a lot of carbohydrates also is the carbohydrates stick to the teeth, and you're going to have a lot of tartar buildup. And I find that if a dog has a lot of tartar or really bad breath, putting them on a raw diet will actually take that away. And throwing in some raw meaty bones, uncooked of course, because splintered bones would get lodged in the intestinal tract and maybe end up in an emergency surgery, but we're talking about raw marrow bones that your dog can chew on and is going to naturally clean their teeth. Second of all, we need to talk about a balanced diet. We touched on that a little bit, and a balanced diet would be what I have learned as a student of a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ian Billinghurst, who is a veterinarian from Australia. And he did several years, I think it's been 30 years at least since he started his research on feeding species appropriate diet to cats and dogs. And he found out what is actually truly complete and balanced. It is hard to do that with a kibble and a kibble alone. So what Dr. Billinghurst did was he actually recommended people start with a homemade raw diet, which is actually the best diet if you can actually read a lot of the books, such as a book called Give Your Dog a Bone, which is the first book I read by Ian Billinghurst. There's another one called Growing Your Puppy with Bones, and there's several other books that he's kind of condensed those books into. And the name of the company and the name of this concept of eating is Barf, and it sounds gross, and people go, well, I'm not going to give my dog anything that sounds like barf. But it stands for biologically appropriate raw food, okay? So as we are talking about this, that's what I mean when I say barf, and when I talk about it specifically as a product, it is also called Barf World International. And there is a barf contingency here in the United States, and Ian is still doing his food over in Europe and in Australia. So most times we're used to hearing an industry standard called AFCO, which looks at dog labels and says, you know, what is the minimum that you need to have in this food? Is it in there? There's also a newer agency that I have become acquainted with now called APHIS, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about kibble. But they're even more stringent because in selling some of the foods that go into Europe, they have higher standards, and so APHIS comes in and does a lot more higher standard type monitoring of the places where the foods are being made. So the #1 best diet would be a homemade raw food. And if you're gonna do that, I really want you to not jump into it. I want you to at least get Dr. Billinghurst's books and read those. Find a good mentor, maybe a holistic veterinarian that can help you there, but realize it's gonna be for people that have a lot of time and maybe a lot of money, which a lot of people don't fall into that category, but some people do, and they want to make it themselves. Also, Dr. Karen Becker has some books on homemade diet recipes that you can get your hands on, but with those, to make it a little easier, if you get your own food, maybe from a butcher. We have a butcher close to us and they have a kennel mix. And so you could actually take that mix, which is organs and meat and some bones ground into a mixture. And then what I mix into it, because I know my dogs need their other nutrients in the form of fruits and vegetables, but in a pulverized version. You can't just throw them in chopped up. You want to either add them with a food processor, or you want to have them pulverized, like in the eBarf Plus, which is a canister about this big, and it has a little scoop and it'll tell you how much to use with your raw meaty bone mixture. And I recommend that along with Barf's product called Alaskan salmon oil. You want to add that to your dog's diet. So those two things make the homemade really easy. If you don't have a lot of time, but you have the money, then the commercially made raw diets are becoming very, very accessible. Although while they're being made very accessible, a lot of dog food companies are jumping on the bandwagon and taking some of their just crappy, horrible ingredients from their commercial foods and just making it into a soft form and calling it raw. So be very careful that when you look at those that are gonna happen, they're gonna pop up more and more in the next 5 years, because raw, as I've talked to holistic veterinarians, is going to be the trend and the norm within the next 5 years. And many of them don't want to let their clients make their own raw food. So they really like the idea of a commercially made raw food, especially formulated by a holistic veterinarian who has done the research and knows what to do. So a lot of the concepts that Barf has now came from Ian Billinghurst. There are other people involved in the company that are specialists in raw food as well. And so this is one that a lot of veterinarians feel very comfortable. They feel like it's dummy proof, and they will recommend it to their clients. So that would be one that I would recommend. If you want to find information on it, you can go to my website at emlabradors.com and click on the health and nutrition button, and in the drop down, you'll see exploring raw diet for your dog. And there's a lot of information there if you want to look further. Also, I would say that you're going to find also in the pet boutique stores, there's going to be some raw food in there. I've tried some of those, and a lot of those contain a lot of high fructose corn syrup. You want to watch for that, a lot of sugar in them. Also watch, just like we are with the commercial pet foods and the kibbles, the high amount of GMOs, lots of pea protein, pea fiber, pea flour, lots of corn, phytoestrogens, things that are gonna wreak havoc with your dog's hormones and thyroid. You wanna be very careful because these food companies are just jumping on the bandwagon, putting that kind of stuff into the soft form and calling it raw. The third food on the list would be a cooked, balanced, homemade diet. And although this is high on the list, I don't recommend it because, again, whenever you cook something, you break down the nutrients in that food. So that's one of the things we do as Americans. We cook everything. So when people go on a paleo diet, they basically are eating all raw fruits and vegetables and maybe some lean meats like fish and boiled chicken. So I don't recommend that diet at all. Number 4 would be a human grade canned food. This is not nutritionally complete for cats and dogs, and it is the most expensive, by the way. Next on the list would be human grade dry food, which is not moisture dense, so I wouldn't recommend that because it's not species appropriate. Number 6 would be your super premium canned foods. Number 7 on the list, your super premium dry foods. Number 8 on the list would be a vet recommended canned food. I want to jump back to your premium dog foods because I am a label reader. I always watch labels. I find out that in the last 5 years, a lot of what used to be really good premium dry foods have now become just full of fillers and, like I said, all these GMOs, phytoestrogens. And so I found that they're doing this and they're not telling the consumer, and the consumer is all of a sudden finding these problems with their dogs that they didn't have before. So they changed the label. They do not let the consumer know that. And so if anybody asks me if they just cannot do the raw diet and they insist on a kibble, there's only one that I recommend. It's called Life's Abundance. They're out of Jupiter, Florida. You can find that also on my website, their food and the way that they make it. There are videos on my YouTube channel that you can find more about that, but that's the only one that I would recommend. And it was formulated by a holistic veterinarian, and I spent a whole week with her before I even started using that food and recommending it, but you can find more on our other videos about that. Next on the food list, I was mentioning the vet recommended foods, and I just want to make a quick mention that a few years ago, our vet clinic staff, and there's about 8 or 10 veterinarians on staff, went to a dog food symposium in Florida, and they came back and they told us that the food that ended up on the bottom of the list was the science diet, the prescription diet. And the scariest thing I found was at one point when my veterinarian handed me a jar of that, I said, "What's in it?" And they couldn't even tell me what the ingredients were. So that was scary to me. So if they're not telling the veterinarians, they're not telling the consumer. So that makes me very, very cautious. Number 10 on the list would be your grocery store canned food. And I'm just gonna say across the board, stay away from the grocery stores, period. The other on the list would be a grocery store dry food. And last on the list would be a grocery store semi-moist pouch food. And when you open that seal on those, it does have kind of a mushy texture. And remember that one of the main ingredients in this product is propylene glycol, which is second cousin to antifreeze. So I would just say no, 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 no. So the worst thing you could do overall would be an unbalanced diet. You don't want to do a homemade diet that is just food scraps. So that I would say would be the worst food, is that at the end of the day, you just throw whatever you guys ate, piece of bread, maybe a little bit of vegetables and some cooked meat, and you don't even give any thought to what is complete and balanced and species appropriate for your pet. That would be the worst food overall. So again, don't beat yourself up if you're not at the top of the list. If you are, you can pat yourself on the back. That's great. Just take the opportunity to try to improve what you're doing. Thanks so much for listening to this video. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up, and also make sure you subscribe to our channel, because we'll then be able to get you all the latest videos and update you on all the latest trends and all the latest information coming out. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.